All right, diving into the world of Maya Angelou today. Specifically her autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings.
Yeah.
And, I was just blown away by this book. The emotional texture of it, how she just captures like what it felt like to be, a young Black girl growing up in the Jim Crow South. And we're not just gonna, recount the events, but really try to understand, the nuances of her experience.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is how she uses these like seemingly small details
Hmm.
to reveal a much bigger picture
Yeah.
about, resilience, identity, finding your voice in a world that's trying to silence you.
Right, like little things, like
Right.
a mispronounced name or
Yeah.
a piece of candy like
Yeah.
stolen from the store.
Yeah.
Like take the store, for example. It wasn't just a place to buy groceries. It was like this vibrant heart of the Black community and stamps. You can almost feel the warmth and safety she describes,
Yeah.
like a refuge from the harsh world outside. But then she'll hit you with like this gut punch of the image of her Uncle Willie hiding in a vegetable bin to escape the KKK.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah. That image is so powerful. A grown man, disabled, forced to hide among potatoes and onions, like some kind of hunted animal. It speaks volumes about the constant fear that Black people lived with in that time.
Right.
This ever-present threat of racial violence
Yeah.
that could just erupt at any moment.
Yeah, and reading that, it made me think like, how do you even begin to process that kind of fear as a child? Especially when you're still finding joy and like playing
Yeah.
price with your brother, like dipping the store strainer into the candy jar.
It's almost like those moments of childhood mischief were a necessary counterpoint
Yeah.
to the darkness that surrounded them. Kids, even in the face of oppression, are still going to find ways to be kids. And for Maya and Bailey, that playful spirit, that resilience, was really nurtured by their grandmother, Annie Henderson, or Mama, as they called her.
Mama,
Yeah.
such a fascinating character, this rock of strength and morality, enforcing this strict code of conduct, especially when it came to interacting with white people. And it makes you realize how, navigating those social rules wasn't just about politeness, it was about survival.
Absolutely. Mama understood the precariousness of their situation. Any perceived impudence towards a white person
Mm.
could have dire consequences.
Right.
But even with that strictness, you can see the love and the protectiveness she had for her grandchildren.
Yeah, there's this scene where young Maya witnesses these white girls mocking Mama, and it just shatters her world. She realizes in that moment the depth of that racial hierarchy, how it strips Black people of their dignity and their power. It's like a veil is lifted, and she sees the ugliness of prejudice for what it truly is.
Right. It's a pivotal moment in her development, a harsh lesson in the realities of the Jim Crow South. And it makes you wonder how that early exposure to racism, those ingrained power dynamics,
Hmm.
shaped her view of white people.
It's like she says later in the book, they were seen as the other, powerful, frightening figures, almost dehumanized to a degree, which makes sense, right? When you're constantly told that you're inferior, when you witness firsthand the casual cruelty and violence they're capable of, it warps your perception.
It's a psychological defense mechanism, I think,
Yeah.
a way to cope with the fear and the powerlessness. And it really speaks to the pervasive impact of segregation, how it created this chasm between Black and white communities, fostering suspicion and distrust on both sides.
And you can see that playing out in Maya's experience with Mrs. Cullinan, this white woman she works for briefly. What struck me was how Mrs. Cullinan insisted on calling her Mary, even after being corrected multiple times. Like,
Yeah.
she couldn't even be bothered to learn her name.
It's such a seemingly small detail, but it speaks volumes about the casual erasure of Black identity that was so common. During that era, it's like Mrs. Cullinan couldn't even be bothered to acknowledge Maya's real name, to see her as an individual worthy of respect.
It's almost like a microaggression, right? But one with such deep historical and psychological weight, it's dehumanizing,
Yeah.
a way of asserting dominance and control. And it makes you wonder, like, how do you even begin to push back against that?
Well, in Maya's case, she finds a way,
Um,
even as a young girl. She breaks Mrs. Cullinan's prized china, leading to her quitting the job.
Yeah,
It's a small act of defiance, but a significant one.
right.
Yeah.
It made me think about how sometimes even the smallest acts of resistance can be empowering, especially when you're navigating a world that constantly tries to diminish you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a turning point for Maya. She discovers a sense of agency, a way to push back against the disrespect and reclaim a piece of her own power. And it foreshadows the strong, outspoken woman she'll eventually become.
Right, but it wasn't always easy for her to find her voice. There's this period in her childhood where she retreats into near total silence, almost like she's been traumatized into muteness,
Yeah.
you know?
It's a really powerful example of how trauma can manifest, especially in children. And it raises some interesting questions about the connection between language identity and power. If language is a tool of expression and empowerment,
Mm.
then being silenced can be a form of oppression.
Whoa.
Yeah,
That's deep. It makes you think about the broader silencing of Black voices during that era. It wasn't just about individual experiences, it was systemic,
right.
built into the fabric of society.
Precisely. Yeah. And it makes Maya's eventual journey of finding her voice through literature all the more powerful. It's like she reclaims that lost power through words, through storytelling.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, there's something else I wanted to touch on. The contrast between Maya's experiences in stamps and her time in St. Louis with her mother.
Oh, yeah. That part always stood out to me, too. It's like this brief glimpse into a different world, a different kind of Black experience.
Exactly. The Stamps was this small rural town where everyone knew each other, where life revolved around the church and the store. But St. Louis was this bustling city, full of energy and opportunity, but also danger and anonymity.
Right, and she encounters a whole different set of social dynamics there. The way she describes the nightlife, the music, the sense of freedom and possibility, it's such a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of Stamp.
Yeah, it highlights the diversity of Black experiences during that era.
Yeah.
There wasn't just one monolithic Black experience in the Jim Crow South. It varied depending on geography, social class, individual circumstances.
Right, it's like she gets a taste of a different kind of life, a world where she might be able to explore different aspects of herself. But then she's pulled back to Stamps. And you can almost feel her disappointment, like a door closing on a world of possibilities.
And it makes you wonder how that brief exposure to a different way of life might have planted these seeds of restlessness, a yearning for something more than what Stamps had to offer.
Right. It's like she's starting to realize the limitations imposed on her, not just by racism, but by the confines of her small town existence. And that yearning for something more, that desire to break free from those limitations, I think that's a key part of her story going forward.
Absolutely. And it's a theme that resonates with so many people, regardless of their background, that desire to find your place in the world, to break free from the constraints of your upbringing and forge your own path.
Yeah.
But for Maya, that journey is going to be particularly complex,
Yeah.
especially given the social and political landscape of the time.
Yeah, and that's what makes her story so compelling. It's not just a historical account. It's a deeply personal journey of self-discovery, resilience, and ultimately, finding your voice in a world that tries to silence you.
And as we delve deeper into the book, we'll see how those themes play out in Maya's life, how she navigates the complexities of family racism and the power of language to both wound and heal.
I'm ready to dive in. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. There's so much more to unpack.
Yeah, there is. One of the most striking things about Angelou's story is the way she portrays the complexities of family. It's not all sunshine and roses, there's love and support, but also disappointment, conflict, and a whole lot of messy reality.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like her relationship with her father, Big Bailey, she builds him up in her mind as this almost mythical figure. And then when he finally shows up, he's, well, human. Just like everybody else.
Yeah, it's a classic coming-of-age experience, right? The shattering of those idealized images we create, especially about our parents.
Right.
And it's interesting how that disappointment doesn't diminish her love for him. It just makes it more complex, more nuanced.
Right. And then there's that wild trip to Mexico with Big Bailey. Talk about a roller coaster. Adventure culture shock. And some really unsettling moments with her father
Yeah.
that are hard to read, honestly.
That trip is fascinating
Yeah.
because it throws Maya into a completely different cultural context. On one hand, she's experiencing this incredible sense of freedom, like a loosening of those rigid social rules. That defined her life in Stamps. Remember that scene in the Mexican cantina where she's dancing, laughing, connecting with people despite the language barrier?
Yeah, it's like a breath of fresh air, a glimpse into a world where race doesn't seem to matter as much.
Exactly. But at the same time, she's also dealing with her father's increasingly erratic behavior, which brings its own set of challenges and anxiety. So it's like this potent mix of liberation and danger. And it really highlights that push and pull of growing up, trying to find your own footing, while navigating these complex family dynamics.
And speaking of finding her footing, let's talk about the transformative power of education in Maya's life. It's not just about academics. It's about empowerment, breaking free from the limitations imposed on her by a racist society.
Yeah, she talks about her pride and her academic achievements, her determination to excel. It's like she's saying, I may be black, I may be a girl, but I'm going to prove I'm just as capable, if not more so than anyone else.
Remember her dream of becoming a conductorette?
Yes,
That really struck me. I mean, at that time in stamps, a black woman on a streetcar collecting fares, calling out stops. That was a radical idea.
it was, and it speaks to her ambition, her refusal to be confined by the narrow expectations of her time.
Right.
Then life throws her a curveball. She becomes pregnant at 16.
Yeah, that's a heart-wrenching moment. It forces her to confront the limited options available to young black women in that area, the way societal expectations could trap them, in a cycle of poverty and hardship.
It highlights the intersectionality of race and gender, how
Hmm.
they combine to create a particularly challenging landscape for black women.
Right.
But even in the face of that adversity, you see Maya's resilience shining through.
She doesn't let this experience define her. Instead, it becomes another layer in her journey of self-discovery, a catalyst for growth and resilience. And it makes you think about how she might have turned out if she hadn't had those strong female figures in her life. Mama, Mrs.
Oh,
Flower.
absolutely. Mrs. Flowers, what a pivotal character. She's the one who introduces Maya to the power of literature, who helps her break free from that self-imposed silence.
I know. Remember how Maya describes her? She was one of the few gentle women I have ever known, and has remained throughout my life the measure of what a human being can be.
Wow.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah, Mrs. Flowers recognized something special in Maya, something that needed nurturing. She gave her books, exposed her to beautiful language, encouraged her to find her own voice.
Yeah.
And it's through literature that Maya begins to heal, to articulate her experiences, to reclaim her power.
It's like reading becomes this lifeline for her, a way to make sense of the world, to process her trauma, to find solace and strength in words. And it makes you think about the transformative power of education, especially for young people facing adversity.
It's not just about acquiring knowledge, it's about finding yourself,
Yeah.
discovering your potential,
Hmm.
realizing you have something valuable to contribute to the world.
Right.
And for Maya, that journey of self-expression through language becomes inextricably linked to her journey of healing and resilience.
But before she can fully embrace that voice, there's another trauma she has to confront: the sexual assault. It's a brutal reminder of the vulnerability of black girls in a racist society, the way their bodies were often seen as objects, not deserving of respect or protection.
It's a heart-wrenching part of the book, and it speaks to the intersectionality of oppression, how race, gender, and power dynamics can converge to create unimaginable pain. And it makes you think about how that trauma might have contributed to Maya's earlier silence, how it might have robbed her of her voice, literally and figuratively.
Right, and it makes her eventual journey of reclaiming that voice even more powerful, more defiant. She's not just speaking for herself, she's speaking for all those who have been silenced, marginalized, abused.
Exactly. And that's what makes I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings such a powerful and enduring work. It's not just a personal story. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of finding your voice in the face of adversity. And it speaks to the enduring legacy of racism and sexism, reminding us that the fight for equality and justice is far from over.
You know, there's this line that really stuck with me. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. And it makes you think about how important it is to share our stories, to bear witness to the complexities of human experience, both the joyful and the painful.
Absolutely. And that's what Maya Angelou does so brilliantly in this book. She invites us into her world, into her heart. And in doing so, she expands our understanding of what it means to be human, to navigate the challenges of life, and to find beauty and strength even in the darkest of times.
You know, it's funny, because even though I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is set in the Jim Crow South, a time and place that seems so distant now, there's something so timeless about her story, something that resonates so deeply with people from all walks of life. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because at its core, it's a story about the search for identity, for belonging, for meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and unjust. It's a story about the power of love, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. And those themes are universal, timeless,
Yeah.
and deeply relevant to all of us, no matter who we are or where we come from.
You know what else really struck me was the role of humor. Even amidst those really heavy moments, there's this undercurrent of like wit and playfulness. Like how else could you survive, such a challenging childhood?
Right, it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit finds ways to laugh, to find joy in the small things. And for Maya and Bailey, their shared sense of humor, their ability to find the absurdity in their situation, it's a testament to their resilience. Remember that scene where Bailey tries to steal candy using the store strainer?
Oh yeah, classic Bailey. I mean, it's a little mischievous, sure, but you can't help but chuckle at their ingenuity. It shows how, even under the weight of segregation and poverty, they still found ways to be kids, to experience the world with a sense of wonder and playfulness.
It speaks to the power of laughter as a coping mechanism, a way to reclaim a sense of agency in a world that often felt out of their control.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that Black people, even under the oppressive system of Jim Crow, were fully human, with the capacity for joy, laughter, and all the complexities of life.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another really important theme, the power of community. Throughout the book, we see how the Black community in Stamps really rallied around each other, providing support, sharing resources, celebrating their shared heritage.
The store itself becomes a symbol of that community. It's not just a place to buy groceries, it's a gathering place,
Yeah.
a space for connection, storytelling, and collective resilience.
Remember how she describes it? The warmth of the pot-bellied stove in the winter, the smell of fresh-baked bread, the sounds of laughter and conversation filling the air. It creates such a vivid picture of a community bound together by shared experiences, traditions, and a deep sense of kinship.
And it makes you realize how vital that sense of community was
Mm-hmm.
for Black people during that era. In a society that systematically denied them access to resources and opportunities, they had to rely on each other for support, both practical and emotional.
Right. It's a reminder that we're stronger together, that collective action and mutual support can be powerful forces for change. The themes of community and resilience resonate today, especially in times of social and political upheaval.
Absolutely. Angelou's story reminds us that the fight for equality and justice is a marathon, not a sprint, and that we need to draw strength and inspiration from those who came before us, who paved the way for the progress we've made. And it reminds us that we don't have to fight alone. There's power in coming together, in amplifying each other's voices, and in supporting each other's journeys.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from Maya Angelou's story?
I think it's the enduring power of finding your voice, no matter the obstacles you face. Whether it's through writing, speaking art, or simply living your truth authentically, your voice matters.
Mhm.
And by sharing your story, you not only empower yourself, but you have the potential to inspire and uplift others.
I love that. It's a message of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of storytelling. And it's a reminder that even in a world that often feels divided and chaotic, our individual voices have the power to create connection, understanding, and ultimately change.
So to our listener, I encourage you to embrace your own unique voice, to share your story, and to never underestimate the impact you can have on the world.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the lessons we've gleaned from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. We encourage you to seek out this powerful work and discover its magic for yourselves. Until next time, keep diving deep, friends.